American.
He's a citizen. He's a citizen. He's a citizen. He's a citizen. That's my brother-in-law.
Get away from me.
A federal judge in Illinois scrambled to convene a last-minute hearing this morning to say she is, quote, startled by videos she is seeing of ICE's tactics on the streets of Chicago. Now, she says she has, quote, serious concerns that the federal law enforcement agents she is seeing are not following her orders in the Windy City. It comes as CNN obtains new video that shows a Border Patrol agent tackling and pinning a 19-year-old outside of a Walgreens store in Chicago.
Okay, so a federal judge just dropped what might be the biggest constitutional bomb of Trump's second term. And yeah, this one's wild. We quote Reed talking about a Massachusetts judge, Judge William Young, who just straight up blocked Trump from deporting thousands of pro-Palestinian protesters, foreign students, faculty members, people who were here legally, studying, teaching, living their lives, and Trump's administration wanted them gone. Why? Because they protested. Let me say that again. The Trump administration, Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem and Secretary of State Marco Rubio, it put together a list, over 5,000 names, students and scholars, all identified through this website called Canary Mission, which is basically a doxing site that tracks people who criticize Israel or support Palestinian rights. And the administration was ready to deport every single one of them. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest. You can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us, be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video. Can you believe this? We're not talking about people who broke laws. We're not talking about violence or threats. We're talking about college kids who showed up to a protest, who held a sign, who chanted at a rally. That's it. And for that, Trump wanted them kicked out of the country. But here's where it gets good. Judge Young, and listen to this quote because it's fire. He wrote in his 161-page ruling, and I'm paraphrasing here, that no law means no law. The First Amendment does not draw President Trump's invidious distinction. 161 pages. This judge sat down and wrote a book explaining why what Trump tried to do was unconstitutional. And he didn't hold back. He said Homeland Security and the State Department deliberately and purposefully acted to chill free speech. That's not legal jargon. That's a judge saying they knew exactly what they were doing and they did it anyway. This is the first major legal smackdown of Trump's second-term national security agenda. And yeah, it's happening right as these massive No Kings protests are sweeping the country. Tens of thousands of people in the streets saying Trump's acting like a dictator. And now a federal judge basically agrees. So here's the thing most people don't get yet. This ruling isn't just about pro-Palestinian protests. It's not even just about deportations. This is about whether Trump can use the power of the federal government to silence anyone who disagrees with him. Students today, but who's next? Journalists, labor organizers, anyone who criticizes his policies? And come on, let's be real here. Trump's been trying to crack down on protests since day one of his second term. He's threatened to use the Insurrection Act. He's tried to deploy National Guard troops to cities run by Democrats. Multiple judges have blocked him already. This Massachusetts ruling is just the latest in a pattern, and the pattern is pretty clear. Trump sees protests as disloyalty. He sees dissent as something that needs to be crushed. The American Association of University Professors sued over this. So did the Middle East Studies Association. They called it what it is, an ideological deportation program. Think about that phrase, ideological deportation. We're deporting people not for what they did, but for what they think, for their politics, for their views on a foreign conflict. And yeah, the administration denies it. They'll say it's about security. They'll say it's about protecting Jewish students on campus. But Judge Young looked at the evidence, all 161 pages worth, and said, nope, this is about punishing speech. This is about using immigration law as a weapon against the First Amendment. Here's what makes this even crazier. These aren't even U.S. citizens we're talking about. These are foreign nationals, students on visas, professors on work permits. And the Trump administration's argument was basically, well, they're not citizens, so they don't have First Amendment rights. Judge Young destroyed that argument. He said, if you're lawfully in the United States, you have the same free speech rights as everyone else. Doesn't matter where you're from. Doesn't matter what your visa status is. This is huge, and it's happening right now in October 2025 with midterm elections coming up in 2026. with massive protests already planned, with Trump pushing harder and harder against constitutional limits every single week. The timing couldn't be more important. We're seeing this ruling land right in the middle of nationwide demonstrations against executive overreach, right when people are already in the streets questioning whether Trump respects any limits on his power. And suddenly a federal judge hands them a 161-page document saying, yeah, your concerns are valid. The president is violating the Constitution, so buckle up. Because what I'm about to walk you through, it's not just a legal story. It's not just about some court case in Massachusetts. This is about whether America still protects free speech, or whether we've entered a new era where the president can punish you for disagreeing with him. And yeah, it's as serious as it sounds. All right, so let's dig into how we got here. Because this didn't just come out of nowhere. Trump's second term has been, let's call it aggressive, when it comes to protests, especially on college campuses, and especially when those protests involve Israel and Palestine. The administration has made it crystal clear, if you're critical of Israel, if you support Palestinian rights, you're going to have problems. Now, the Canary Mission website, this is important. It's been around for years, but most people don't know about it. It's this anonymous site that basically doxes students, professors, activists, anyone who speaks out about Palestinian rights or criticizes Israeli policy. It posts their names, their photos, their schools, sometimes even their home addresses. The whole point is intimidation. Make people afraid to speak up because they know they'll end up on this list. And here's the thing. The Trump administration used that list. They actually used a doxing website run by anonymous people with a clear political agenda as the basis for deportation proceedings. Think about that. The United States government, Homeland Security, they went to an anonymous website and said, yeah, these are the dangerous people we need to kick out. The lawsuit came from two major academic groups. The American Association of University Professors, that's AAUP. They represent faculty across the country, and the Middle East Studies Association, MESA, which is scholars who actually study this region for a living. Both groups looked at what the administration was doing and said this is ideological persecution. This is McCarthyism. This is the government targeting people for their political beliefs. Over 5,000 people were on the list. 5,000. Students from MIT, from Harvard, from UCLA, from universities all over the country. Professors who've been teaching for decades. Graduate students doing research. All of them facing deportation. Not because they broke any laws, but because they went to a protest. Can you imagine? You're a graduate student from Jordan. You've been in the US for 3 years. You're working on your PhD. You go to one protest about Gaza. You hold a sign, and suddenly Homeland Security is knocking on your door saying pack your bags. Your research doesn't matter. Your academic achievements, irrelevant. You criticize Israeli policy, so you're out. Judge Young looked at all of this and said it's unconstitutional, plain and simple. He wrote that the administration's actions were deliberately and purposefully designed to chill free speech. That's a big deal legally, because it means this wasn't just some policy mistake. It wasn't an accident. They knew what they were doing. They intended to silence people. And yeah, the First Amendment. Let's talk about that for a second. Because the Trump administration's argument was basically, these people aren't citizens, so they don't have First Amendment rights. Which, come on, that's not how it works. The Constitution doesn't say Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech unless you're not a citizen. It says no law, period. Judge Young quoted that in his ruling. No law means no law. He's basically saying the First Amendment doesn't have an asterisk. It doesn't say terms and conditions apply. If you're in the United States lawfully, you have free speech rights. End of story. Now here's where this connects to everything else happening right now. The No Kings protests. You heard about these? They started a few weeks ago, October, and they're spreading fast. The name comes from the Supreme Court's immunity ruling that basically said presidents are above the law for official acts. People are calling Trump a king, saying he's acting like he has no limits, and they're taking to the streets. These protests are massive. We're talking tens of thousands of people in cities across the country. In Trump's response, he wants to send in the National Guard. He's threatened to invoke the Insurrection Act, which would let him use military force against civilians. Multiple federal judges have already blocked him. California, Oregon, Illinois, judges keep saying no, you can't do this. See the pattern? Trump tries to crack down on speech. Judges say no. Trump tries to deploy troops against protesters. Judges say no. Trump tries to deport students for protesting. Judges say no. It's the same playbook over and over. And every time a judge blocks him, he gets more aggressive with the next attempt. And let's be real, this isn't about security. If this was about security, they'd be targeting people based on actual threats. But they're not. They're targeting people based on politics, based on ideology, A student who protests in favor of Palestinian rights gets deported. A student who stays silent or supports Israel, nothing happens. That's not security policy. That's thought control. The administration will tell you they're protecting Jewish students. They'll say college campuses have become hostile to Jewish people because of these protests. And look, anti-Semitism is real. Hate crimes are real. Nobody's saying those things don't matter. But you can't use that as an excuse to deport people for peaceful protests. You can't say we're protecting one group by violating the constitutional rights of another group. Judge Young saw through it. He looked at the evidence and said this is pretextual. That's the legal term. It means you're giving one reason publicly, but your real reason is something else. The administration said it's about security, but Judge Young found it's actually about silencing criticism of Israel and punishing people for their political views. Here's another crazy part. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Secretary of Homeland Security Kristi Noem, these are Senate-confirmed cabinet officials. They're not low-level bureaucrats. They're running major departments of the federal government. And a federal judge just found they deliberately violated people's constitutional rights. Think about that. The people in charge of our immigration system, the people in charge of our foreign policy, the judge said they purposefully broke the law. So what happens now? Well, the deportations are blocked, at least for now. The 5,000 people on that list, they're not getting kicked out. But this is going to get appealed. The Trump administration isn't just going to accept this ruling and move on. They'll appeal to the First Circuit, maybe all the way to the Supreme Court. And with the Supreme Court we have now, who knows what happens. But here's why this matters right now. In October 2025, the midterms are coming, November 2026. That's just over a year away. And this ruling is ammunition for Trump's critics. It's proof from a federal judge that Trump is overstepping constitutional limits. Democrats are going to run on this. They're going to say, look, even judges appointed by Republicans are saying Trump has gone too far. And yeah, college students vote. Young people vote. The exact people Trump tried to deport or intimidate, their voters. Maybe not the foreign students, but their American classmates, their friends, the people who watch this happen. They're paying attention. They're registering. They're organizing. This is also going to embolden more protests. If you're a student and you've been scared to speak up because you saw what happened to others, this ruling tells you the courts have your back. It tells you the Constitution still means something. It's going to bring more people off the sidelines. Universities themselves are watching this closely too. Because think about it. If the government can deport your international students for attending protests, that affects enrollment. It affects research. It affects the whole academic environment. Schools like MIT and Harvard, they depend on international students. And those students aren't going to come if they think one protest could get them kicked out. The ruling also sends a message to other countries. It says, yeah, America still values free speech, despite what Trump's doing. Despite the authoritarian impulses, the courts are still enforcing constitutional rights. That matters for America's reputation abroad. It matters for soft power. It matters for whether talented students and researchers want to come here. Okay, so let's break this down into what actually matters. What you need to understand about this ruling and why it's a bigger deal than just one court case. First, this is about the limits of presidential power. Trump has spent his second term testing those limits. He's pushed and pushed to see how far he can go. Can he deploy troops domestically? Can he fire federal workers without cause? Can he deport people for speech? And judges keep saying no. This Massachusetts ruling is the clearest no yet on the free speech question. Judge William Young, he's not some liberal activist judge, by the way. He was appointed by a Republican president. He's been on the bench for decades. And he wrote 161 pages explaining why Trump's deportation policy violates the Constitution. That's not a quick ruling. That's not a narrow technical decision. That's a judge who looked at everything, all the evidence, all the legal arguments, and said this is fundamentally wrong. When a judge writes 161 pages, that's deliberate. That's a judge who knows this is going to get appealed. Who knows the Supreme Court might eventually see this, so he's building the most thorough record possible. He's anticipating every counter-argument. He's making it as hard as possible for higher courts to overturn him. Second, this is about whether non-citizens have rights. The Trump administration argued they don't. At least not First Amendment rights. Judge Young said that's garbage. He said if you're lawfully in the United States, if you have a visa, if you're here legally, you have the same free speech protections as citizens. This is huge for immigrants. It's huge for international students. It means you don't give up your constitutional rights just because you weren't born here. And let's think about what the alternative would be. If the government could deport anyone who isn't a citizen for speech they don't like, that would chill speech everywhere. American citizens would be afraid to associate with immigrants. Immigrants would be afraid to speak at all. Universities would become surveillance states where foreign students just keep their heads down and their mouths shut. That's not freedom. That's authoritarianism. The implications go beyond campuses too. Think about all the non-citizens working in America, green card holders, people on work visas, H-1B visa holders in tech companies. If the government can punish you for speech, what does that do to workplace organizing, to union activity, to whistleblowing? It creates a permanent underclass of people who have no free speech rights. That's not the America we're supposed to be. Third, this is about using immigration law as a weapon. And yeah, that's what this is. Immigration enforcement is supposed to be about national security, public safety, following the law. It's not supposed to be about punishing political dissent, but Trump has turned it into exactly that. If you criticize Israel, deportation. If you protest his policies, deportation. It's using the immigration system to do what he can't do to citizens. Because here's the thing, Trump can't arrest American citizens for peaceful protest. The First Amendment stops him. But he thought he found a loophole. He thought he could deport non-citizens for the same conduct. And Judge Young said, nope, that's not a loophole. That's still unconstitutional. You can't do an end run around the First Amendment by targeting people's immigration status. This weaponization of immigration law, it's not new with Trump, but he's taken it to a whole new level. Previous administrations focused immigration enforcement on people who actually broke immigration laws, overstaying visas, working without authorization, border crossings. But Trump is targeting people who are here legally, people who followed all the rules. Their only violation, political speech the administration doesn't like. Fourth, and this is the part people aren't talking about enough, this is about Canary Mission and doxing. The fact that the federal government used an anonymous doxing website as evidence for deportation proceedings is insane. We don't know who runs Canary Mission. We don't know their methodology. We don't know if their information is accurate. It's literally just a website that posts names and says these people are bad. And Homeland Security looked at that and said, yeah, good enough for us. Can you imagine if they did this with anything else? If they used an anonymous website to decide who gets audited by the IRS or who gets investigated by the FBI, people would lose their minds. But because it's immigration and because it's about Palestine, the administration thought they could get away with it. Judge Young's ruling says they can't. It says you need actual evidence. You need due process. You can't just point to a doxing website and start deporting people. This is a huge win for digital rights too, because if courts let the government use anonymous doxing sites as evidence, that sets a terrifying precedent. Suddenly, any anonymous accusation online could be grounds for government action. So what's next? Like I said, this gets appealed. The Trump administration will fight this all the way. They have to, because if this ruling stands, it destroys their ability to use immigration enforcement as political punishment, and that's been a key part of their strategy. But here's what's already happening. Universities are breathing a sigh of relief. Students and faculty who are on that list, they can stay, at least for now. And more importantly, other students see that speaking up doesn't automatically mean deportation. The chilling effect, that's what lawyers call it when people self-censor because they're afraid. That effect just got weaker. The No Kings protests are going to get bigger. You watch. This ruling proves what protesters have been saying. Trump is overreaching. He's violating the Constitution. And the courts are starting to push back. That's going to bring more people into the streets, more organizing, more energy heading into the midterms. And politically, this is a disaster for Trump. Not with his base, they'll stick with him no matter what. But with moderates, with independents, a federal judge saying you deliberately violated the Constitution, that's not a good look. Democrats are going to run ads about this. They're going to talk about Trump, the authoritarian, Trump, the king, Trump who thinks the First Amendment doesn't apply to people he disagrees with. Republicans in competitive districts are going to have to answer questions. Do you support deporting students for peaceful protest? Do you think the First Amendment should have exceptions for non-citizens? Those are hard questions to answer in swing districts, especially districts with universities, especially districts with large immigrant populations. There's also the international angle. America's allies are watching this. They're seeing an American president try to deport people for speech. They're seeing courts have to step in to protect basic rights. That doesn't look good. That makes America look unstable. It makes foreign governments question whether America still stands for the values it claims to represent. And for young voters, this is galvanizing. Gen Z especially. They're the ones on these campuses. They're the ones seeing their classmates threatened with deportation. They're the ones who think free speech actually means something. And they're going to remember this in 2026. They're going to show up and vote. Here's my bottom line. This ruling matters because it's a line in the sand. It's a federal court saying, no, you can't do this. You can't use the power of government to silence dissent. You can't deport people for speech. You can't treat the Constitution like it's optional. Trump has been acting like there are no limits on presidential power. And yeah, the Supreme Court gave him a gift with that immunity ruling. But this Massachusetts decision shows that judges, even in Trump's America, are still willing to enforce constitutional rights. They're still willing to say no when the president goes too far. Is this the end of the fight? No way. This is just round one. There will be appeals. There will be more attempts to crack down on protests. Trump's not going to suddenly respect the First Amendment just because one judge told him to. He's going to keep pushing. He's going to keep testing the limits. That's who he is. But it matters that the judge said it. It matters that there's now a 161-page legal document laying out exactly why Trump's policy is unconstitutional. It matters that 5,000 people aren't getting deported. And it matters that students and faculty across the country now know the courts might actually protect them. This ruling is also a roadmap for other challenges to Trump's policies. It shows how to argue these cases. It shows what evidence matters. It shows that courts will still enforce constitutional limits if you make a strong enough case. That's going to encourage more lawsuits, more legal challenges, more fights in court. So yeah, keep your eyes on this, because it's not just about deportations. It's not just about protests. It's about whether we still live in a country where the Constitution means something, or whether we've crossed into something else, something where the president's power has no real limits, where disagreeing with the government gets you punished. Judge Young said, "We're not there yet. We're still a country of laws." The question is, how long does that last? How many more challenges can the courts withstand? And what happens when Trump finds judges who will let him do whatever he wants? Those are the questions we're going to be answering over the next year as appeals move forward, as more protests happen, as the midterms get closer. This ruling is just one battle in a much longer war over what kind of country America is going to be.